So,
Ready to get started?
yeah, we're going to get started.
A lot of unfamiliar faces to meet, so I'm just going to go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Mason with Pitchel. I worked at the Hive in 2021 for the first span, but I've been a route setter for nearly a decade, a climber for almost double that. In that time, I've managed to set across the continent, both in the US and Canada. And during that time, I would say in the last 5 years, really, I've come to start to think about my route setting practice as a design practice. And since I've started doing that, it's changed the way that I route set. And so I'm hoping to give a few of those ideas out to you all today. Hopefully have you take some home.
My name's Kieran. Some of you know me. I think I've met most of you. If not, I work at the Hive. I run several setting teams. And yeah, I'm thinking about setting as a design practice and trying to think of a theoretical backbone for why we do that for quite some time now. Yeah.
Can everyone hear us okay, by the way? Give me like a thumbs up if speak up a little. Okay. There we go.
Just an HVAC.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
hard. Okay. So we are giving this talk at a staff development day, and the reason that we think it's important to communicate this information is because, by and large, at the Hive, the route setters work behind closed doors. We work when the gym's not open. We don't really get to interact with the members or the other members of the staff. And so a big portion of this is going to be trying to shed light on what's going on in our heads as we're going through the setting process, so that you can go and then take that into your own setting processes, your coaching practices, or in any interactions you might have with members or other staff.
A big part of what today is going to be is basically kind of talking about design theory and design thinking and how it applies to route setting. And on the other end of that, I will be talking about trying to establish a theoretical base and a contextual basis for like what we do and how it applies to the history of a lot of different things that we've already been doing in humankind for a very, very long time. Yeah, so when Mason is speaking and I'm not, it's not because I'm not taking part, it's because I'm doing the second half.
And vice versa. So just to get started, because this is sort of like a lesson and a talk, we want to give you a few learning outcomes, things that we hope you're going to take away by the end of this. We're going to start by, well, not start, it's going to be throughout, but we're going to be coming to think about route setting with design thinking and how that compares and contrasts with route setting without design thinking. We're also going to be talking about the idea of form and function collectively as opposed to form versus function, and how that can apply in route setting. And we'll be speaking a lot about aesthetics, what they are, how to use them, and more importantly, why they're important.
We'll be talking about older problems and routes as offerings, kind of in a constant communication and conversation with the staff, the clientele, the user base, and us, as opposed to like an adversarial relationship where people are trying to break things and do things that we don't. We're going to be talking about providing for those various user groups, so providing consistent experience and an enjoyable experience throughout, whether that be through older problems or like just the visual stimuli of the gym. And we'll be talking about how we view the entire gym as a whole and how holders function within that whole. A holistic approach, if you will.
Yeah, so the way this presentation is going to go, we're going to start by talking a little bit about the history of climbing, climbing gyms and setting styles. We'll jump into talking about design thinking and design theory and how that applies. Kieran's then going to jump into a bit more of the theoretical side of things.
Yeah, I'm going to touch on Gestalt psychology and my independent research on kind of how the psychological aspects of visual stimuli in route setting affect the user groups, and architectural theory and how it applies to route setting as a precursor.
And finally, we will try to bring it all together.
Ideally.
So let's talk a little bit about the history. Just like a very quick show of hands on your fingers, you just like hold up the number of years that you've been climbing. I'm going to flash like almost 2 decades. So if you look around, there's quite a variety. It looks like most people are sitting in the like 3 to 8 year range. We've got a couple of people who have passed 2 decades, some people a little bit less than that. That's a pretty good range. So in the last 20 years and even longer, climbing gyms have really evolved. So we started with people climbing inside as a way to stay entertained and a way to train for outdoor climbing over the winter. In places like the UK UK, this was really big. Other parts of the world, this was big. We wound up with kind of like garage gyms, home walls. I'm sure some of you have encountered that sort of thing in the past, or maybe even currently if Kieran's got a shed that they love to climb in. But the style of climbing is really heinous. It just involves grabbing small holds, pulling as hard as you can. It's really strength oriented. It's focused on getting better and progressing towards your outdoor climbing. And we just have a few examples up on the board here. Some really prominent ones. We have the schoolroom in Sheffield. That was really kind of seminal and formative indoor climbing space. We have on the bottom left one of the first commercial climbing gyms in the world. That's Vertical Club in Seattle, which is now Vertical World, still around today. In the center, we have Joe Rockheads.
Which was opened in 1990 and is still open today.
Pretty impressive. And then finally, like as all of this stuff is evolving and sort of moving in from climbing for like personal training use into climbing commercially, we also have on the top left the evolution of plastic climbing holds. So the first company to do that was Alton-Tracy, which is still around today.
We have a video for you of what old school climbing used to look like.
Not sure if we'll get sound out of this, but this is a very old competition.
Yeah. You can immediately see the differences between how our walls look and how those walls look. Almost completely blank and focusing on just the smallest holds that you can grab.
It's worth noting this is not commercial climbing, this is competition climbing, so there's a bit of a difference, but the style I think is still very representative of the older way of thinking about climbing.
There we go.
So this brings us to modern climbing. Modern route setting, it kind of has evolved alongside climbing gyms because it's a practice that goes hand in hand with the space and as those two evolve, they'll evolve together. So when we think of modern route setting, a lot of things come to mind. I think people think of like a combi style movement, things that are really dynamic, things that are maybe risky climbing. We've also seen a bit of a trend toward ergonomics, so holds becoming less sharp, a bit nicer to grab, cleaner lines, more comfortable.
Larger shapes.
Yeah, larger shapes for sure. The evolution of volumes and macros, like fiberglass holds, are all over the gym if you look around. And there's also some aesthetic qualities that come to mind. We have like these big features, like we just said, kind of like lower density, and that allows for like more visually striking lines. And there's a lot of contrast in the spaces with colors, new hold technologies. So in modern route setting, there's also a big push towards equitability, which goes hand in hand with a concept called athletic empathy. Show of hands, who's heard that term? So athletic empathy kind of first theorized by a very seminal route setter named Tonde Castillo, but it is sort of the idea that we are trying to put ourselves in another person's body while we are going through the setting process. It applies in other ways in different like sort of areas within climbing, but for setting, we are trying to think about what another person might be feeling, how they might be interacting with it, and take ourselves out of our own body into someone else's, and actually into their mind as well. So, as setters, we're also concerned now, as opposed to just the physical elements, we're thinking about curating a climber's experience more as a whole. So thinking about their feelings, their emotions, what sort of is going to inspire them, what might detract from that, and that we're like I said earlier, we're really able to think about climbing in a holistic sense, think about setting as a holistic practice that sits within climbing. So if we think about people who are currently pushing the envelope within that realm, some gyms that come to mind, you may have heard of them. We have Block Shop in Eastern Canada, Cafe Block,
Skywood, Nipam Kuko in Japan.
This is Nipam from Japan. We'll jump back into those references in a little bit. There's a bit of globalization.
Yeah, so one thing that we've kind of seen recently with modern climbing and modern setting styles with the internet and the rise of social media is a kind of homogenization of styles. So setters taking styles from around the globe and trying to implement them in their own gyms. Prior to that, prior to social media, oftentimes there were regional setting styles. You would see them kind of at World Cups displayed. A French style might be like really delicate, kind of technical. German styles were quite powerful. American styles are kind of like long and humpy, and now, as we kind of all have a reference point and are able to be in a kind of constant communication with each other, we see those styles kind of blending into global setting style. Where this is great is, we can derive inspiration from all over the globe. We can be in communication with people who are pushing the limits of like what we can do. We can see what aesthetic qualities they're bringing and what we want to derive inspiration from. Negatively, it kind of creates an echo chamber in where we're just copying other people on the internet to see what we want to do in a gym to benefit us and what we do in the setting, and not thinking about having our own regional setting style that benefits the climbers in our community. So like trying to set towards like people climbing in Squamish, for example, or trying to see what our own cultural values in climbing are and how they're reflected in it.
Just another line of thinking about it.
Do you guys feel like the mood board has had any impact on what we're talking about, or like system boards in general that connect the world?
I think in terms of like systems boards and training boards, they don't really reflect a global setting style. They definitely have increased communication between climbers, but it seems to be a bit more like competitive as opposed to like nurturing. So like I think when I'm talking about like a global setting style, it's like, I will be following a setter from Australia, and that setter from Australia will be like, oh, I saw this thing you did at the gym, that's really cool. And I will see a thing that they did with a bunch of fiberglass, and I'll be like, that's really cool. And then we'll kind of exchange those ideas and introduce those elements to the gym, as opposed to like, I yarded on this frame, so should you?
I think it's a different niche.
Yeah, it is a different niche.
And then a really great question. We just are trying to cover a lot, so we're going to try to hold the questions until the end. No problem, but we're just going to move through here.
I took a chance.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked.
Yeah.
So this brings us into some of the meat of our talk, which is thinking about design. Design is hard to define in like a singular sense, but these are a few definitions that we are going to be using for the talk. They're very broad, and I think it's just going to help us frame our ideas around route setting. So as a verb, design is to plan and make something for a specific use or purpose.
As a noun, it's the way that something's been made, the way that the parts of something are formed and arranged for a particular use. It sounds very similar to routesetting as a process already.
Yeah, next slide. So we're just going to chat quickly about the past or maybe the status quo of route setting right now. So setting is sort of an artistic pursuit concerned with forcing. So setters are trying to get climbers to adhere to a specific sequence that they dream up, and then going to put holes on the wall in such a configuration that ideally that's the only way to do it. So it's a bit tricky trying to parse out the difference between what we're going to talk about in a second, which is design thinking, and this kind of older school bit of thought. But in order to do that, we're going to think about design thinking for a moment. Next slide. So, we'll go on. So, design thinking is a process that we use all the time in route setting. It is not entirely accurate to say that it always happens in these steps. But if you're a route setter, this should look very familiar to you. We're going to be thinking about defining problems, thinking about what resources we can use to then solve those problems. There's always going to be collaboration and communication as we work as a team. And we are always trying to empathize with our user, being the climber who's going to be interacting with these boulders. Finally, there's going to be this kind of recycle process of testing and iterating and testing and iterating. That might sound something like a forerunning process. And at the end of a shift, we're going to be finalizing things. So putting those boulder problems out into the world. This is really similar to what designers do in other fields with talking to their clients and thinking about what their needs might be, and then going through tweaking their designs to try to better fit what they might be looking for. So design thinking, for us, it allows us to bring a much greater degree of efficiency to our processes and flexibility to our processes, because rather than thinking about someone's kind of own artistic and really intentional movement that they're trying to force, we can think instead about trying to create the best product for the gym and the best product for the end user. So if the specific sequence that someone really wanted to do isn't working, that's okay. We as a team can then move forward and say, we're actually going to change this up and try to deliver something that's a bit better. We're always going to have ideas and intentions. There's nothing wrong with trying to get people to climb what you want them to climb without it like setting them kind of feel like meaningless and pointless. But there's going to be a bit of a small difference. Frequently, like climbers are a very morphologically diverse group of people. They're also skillfully diverse. And so someone like Kieran, who's really good at canvassing and coordination moves, might have a harder time with something that I'm good at, which is like using my feet in really precise ways and keeping tension and keeping my feet close to the wall. And so as a result, forcing movement kind of becomes this futile effort, and the result of trying to do so is that we wind up feeling like we're bad at our jobs a lot of the time. The other side effect is that the climbing that we're trying to create will feel forced. It'll feel cramped, it'll feel uncomfortable because you're trying to set something around a specific body size rather than opening that space up and allowing for more people to enjoy the route. It is really okay for one climber to do a route one way and another climber to do it an entirely different way, as long as those two climbers are having a similar experience, both in terms of difficulty and both in terms of like comfortability and ergonomics. Yeah. So we've all heard interactions between route setters and gym members before. Frequently, a climber will corner a setter after a shift and say something to the effect of,
"Hey pal, I broke the beta on your green boulder in the corner."
and in the old school form of thought, thinking about trying to force movement, I just feel bad about that. I'm like, well, shoot, I can respond, oh man, I didn't think of that. I feel bad now that I wasn't able to force it. Or maybe at best I'll just manage like a very indifferent, like whatever, I'm done with my shift, I don't really want to talk to you anyway. So basically, instead of trying to force the movement, we offer the subtle change of trying to encourage it instead. The side effect being that if a boulder problem is well set, if we've done a good job at it, the intended sequence is going to be by far the most desirable. There's going to be one way through, and for the most amount of people, that's going to be the way to do it. We just don't want to be like shutting people out if people avoid it. Yeah, that's it. So just to pause for a second, that's sort of like what we're thinking about when we go through our route setting process in terms of like how we're actually like conceptualizing what we're putting on the wall and how it's going to fit with other user groups. We're trying to think outside of our boxes, both individually and among the team. Like no setting team is going to perfectly represent every climber that comes into the gym, so we're trying to use that athletic empathy through and through to create a product that is going to resonate with the most people. So moving forward here, everyone I think has had the experience of walking into a climbing gym and being really drawn to a route or seeing like really striking boulder problems that inspire and make you want to climb them. I think most of us have also had the experience of walking into a climbing gym and being like, well, I feel like I just wasted $25. We feel that aesthetics and the visual quality of a boulder problem are going to be always the most common first line of encounter that you have with the climbing, like with any kind of climbing.
Oftentimes when you walk into a gym, if they're based on circuit grading or table grading, you kind of gravitate towards what looks best to you. That doesn't mean what looks best to everyone, but like something draws you in visually first.
So because more often than not, the way that we're going to first encounter a climbing gym is visually, we as setters have the opportunity to, just when you walk in the door, start playing with your feelings. We can use the aesthetics to inspire, we can use them to like draw people to certain corners of the gym. If aesthetics aren't used well, we can also cause more negative feelings by accident, like indifference. Someone sees something and it's like, that doesn't look that appealing to me. Or we can see frustration or get disgust out of people even at its worst. Cognitive dissonance, just the things that we want to try to avoid by using design principles to set much more visually coherent boulder problems. So in addition to just setting a boulder problem that looks good on its own, we also have to think about designing boulders that look good within the context of the set, that being the section that we're setting that day, and the context of the gym as a whole. So that's just back on thinking about route setting as a holistic practice. So with all of this in mind, our design elements are, we've got alignment, repetition, contrast, hierarchy, and two kinds of balance. We've got symmetry and tension. So we're just going to go back and forth and run you through these. Alignment is kind of what it sounds like. You can probably look around the gym and find some quick examples of it, but when we are aligning elements, we are trying to create visual connections and sort of make a more unified design. So that could be things like aligning hold angles with each other, or with the holds around them, or with volumes around them, or with angles of the wall. There's a lot of ways to use this. On the top three. So repetition, similarly, is going to be using similar hold shapes or volume shapes to create associations and familiarity. So if design elements are repeated, they're going to give a boulder problem continuity. A really great way to do that is staying within particular hold sets. You can just see this blue boulder right here. We have really great repetition by staying within those block fiberglass sets. And what's next? Contrast. Contrast, almost on the opposite of repetition, is going to be using very, very different elements. It's a bit self-explanatory, but we can achieve that effect of creating more striking boulder problems by using things like really small shapes, really big shapes next to each other, or light volumes or wall color and really dark holds, or even like within the context of a set, like yellow and black or pink and blue next to each other in ways that really separate the boulder problems.
Next we have hierarchy. We can use similar hold shapes or sets kind of in increasing or decreasing size to construct kind of hierarchy in the boulder, kind of leading you upwards or leading you downwards visually and then also physically. Balance in the sense of symmetry. So if we're setting two boulders kind of next to each other, you want to have symmetrical values that kind of indicate wholeness in the set, and balance tension. So to indicate movement through negative space, you might have a really small hold and a really big hold, and then a large space between them, providing tension between the two, kind of indicating that you are supposed to exist in the negative space.
So we've spent a little bit of time now talking about, hopefully it wasn't like too much information all at once, but we've been talking about design thinking, so like the process that we're using while we're going through route setting and going through our day-to-day motions. And we've now spoken a bit about the graphical and visual elements with these last design principles that you've seen here. So I'm just going to, on these next slides, give you some more practical examples of boulder problems and sets that use design thinking very well. And these are all going to be taken from gyms and setters that we feel are doing what we're talking about at a really high level. So Yossi Crimmins is out of Skywood in Australia. He is one of the best in my opinion right now. We've got two boulder problems sitting here. The one to the left, facing that way, is a really great example of hierarchy, which means sort of like smaller holds in the bottom left quadrant, bigger holds on the hold and volume on the top right, and balance with intention, sort of like drawing these distinct lines between the start and the finish of the boulder. The one to the right is a really great example of symmetrical balance, as well as contrast between kind of like blank space and like a really, really big feature, and like red and white on the wall. And this is just going to create like a more continuous effect of the boulder. This is Victor, what's his last name? Floyder, out of Cafe Block in Quebec. Another really great setter. These are all people we can link up with their Instagrams after if you're looking for inspiration. Boulder on the left, really good repetition of volume shapes and as well as alignment between the top lines of those volumes. So they're all kind of facing the same direction. It's going to create repetition and make the boulder feel a bit more whole. On the right, also set by Victor Floyder, have the same hold set repeating a bunch, and then a bit of alignment between the top volume and the bottom volume, as well as a little bit of repetition and contrast, as well as hierarchy. A lot going on in this one, but kind of different styles, what we looked at just before. This is kind of a crazy one. We've got our codes out of France, and Boulder House, just our neighbors in Victoria. So these are looking not at singular Boulder problems, but as at an entire set. And there's really a bunch of design principles going on here. Specifically, we've got a lot of repetition and a lot of alignment, just like everything along in the same line. And repetition being like pretty much the same shape. Maybe it's not the exact same hold, especially with the case on the right. But those shapes repeating themselves over and over again. It's a really interesting way that you can use these principles across a set as a whole, and a great way to play around with things as you are working through the setting process during the day. I really love this sequence of 3 images. It's another one from Yossi at Skywood. We've got four Boulder problems represented here. We've got black, blue, orange, and I think red. Oh no, just kidding. 3 Boulder problems: black, blue, and red. It's hard to tell the color from here. Basically, the reason I really like this sequence of images is because it shows you a setter's process as they're moving through their day. The setter was probably assigned a zone, and 4 boulders to set in that zone. And they did a really, really good job using their space and employing a lot of these design principles. So there's kind of everything going on here. We've got alignment of some of the linear volumes on the left, a lot of repetition between line shapes and circle shapes, a bunch of contrast between those shapes as well. And I think there's a great balance and tension between kind of like smaller shapes on the left that kind of get funneled between those linear volumes, and a really, really big focal point on the top right. The last one we're going to take a look at, this is quite different. This is a Japanese gym called Pipapo. And this gym, I've actually been here. This was back in January. I was really impressed with the setting. It looks a little bit more chaotic, I think, on first glance. So this gym, I think they do a lot of things really, really well, and they employ their own style. But if you look closely, you'll start to notice some of those elements of design that are present here. So we've got a lot of repetition of hold types. We've got great contrast between colors, so people aren't getting lost within what is undeniably a very high density set compared to what we have in a gym like this. There's some good alignment going on as well with volumes and wall angles going from each other. I think the Japanese form is a little bit more fluid, like they don't quite adhere to the same constraints that we have all the time because they're trying to pack a lot into a small space. But you end up with like really efficient use of space, and they have their own unique style, which I think is very cool. I think one of the things to take away from looking at these last sequence of images, we have boulders from all around the world that are all using these design principles in very different ways to kind of create their own flavor and their own style of their setting. But all of them are using these principles very effectively to set very engaging, dynamic, and relatable boulder problems. So one of the last things I want to leave you with here, we think that our setting and our boulder problems should exist kind of at a middle ground between desirability, viability, and feasibility. So as we're setting, this kind of goes in line with the empathy bit. We want the users to really desire to climb the things that we're setting. Sometimes we can play with that and have them maybe not desire to do a specific thing, or forced to do it because it's at the top of the wall. We try to reserve that for kind of like the upper grade ranges, like people who are a bit more experienced. Because at the lower grade ranges, we really want to invite people in a lot of the time, like teach them some things, but like in a really approachable way. We also want boulders to be viable. We want them to work. We want them to encourage movement that feels normal and natural. And lastly, they need to be feasible. So boulders can't really conflict with each other. Like if a giant feature is going to block another move, like that's an issue, and it's going to create a safety hazard. It's going to create crossing over while people are using the space, and people are always going to be like watching out for each other and having to like jump off while the other person is climbing. We also want to be making sure that we're using our resources, that being like the space on the wall and the holds and volumes that we're using in the best possible way, so that we are not kind of like hamstringing ourselves when we go to set stuff in the future. This is kind of where we think Routesetting should exist in this section. So I'm going to turn it over to Kieran now, and we're going to be able to definitely open up into the question section with a bit more about design thinking and design theory. But I know that was a lot of information.
How we feel?
How's everyone? Yeah, get a thumbs up, thumbs down.
How's your brains feeling? It's
Got some
feeling okay. Is, anything needs clarification before we move on?
Anyone want to do like 5 jumping jacks just to like,
Yeah, you want to stand up?
yeah,
Turn around in a
great.
circle?
Yeah, let's do a quick like reset. We're gonna get theoretical.
Yeah. So
force us to.
Okay. Kieran.
Yeah.
Which style of design appeals to you guys the most?
I think it depends on the day for me. It depends on where I'm setting.
Yeah, I think also important to note kind of culturally, the use of space is indicative in those centers. Canada and Australia being like very used to like quite wide open spaces, and like
The US too.
the US,
Yeah.
like being able to just use as much space as you want, whereas Japan is like quite centered into maximizing space.
I would say that this gym is probably like 10 times the size of most of the gyms that I went to in Japan, and has the same amount of really problems,
Yeah.
which is kind of shocking.
Also quite good.
Yeah.
And you can note that that's like a literal cultural reification of how people exist.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sit back down if you want to.
I'm not going to sit back down. So, just as a preface here, a lot of what I'm going to talk about next is less concrete than what Mason just talked about. This is kind of more of a reflection on when I was asked to do this talk. I was asked to do this talk on design. A lot of what I was reading about design was theoretical. In my own setting, I've been applying design thinking and design principles in a pretty concrete way, and I've been trying to think about a historical reflection on, setting as an extension of already existing forms. So, how is setting reflected in design already? How is setting reflected in architecture already? And trying to learn from the histories that we already have established in multiple forms, and trying to kind of make a more theoretical investigation as to like why we do what we do, and have a background into like why instead of saying like that looks nice and that doesn't, why that is for us and how that affects the user experience.
I think it's just important to like recognize that this is like kind of new thought that Kieran's about to present. Like climbing doesn't exist in a framework really, or sorry, routesetting doesn't really exist in an academic or design framework, and so this is like an attempt at doing so.
Yeah, I've just been reading a lot. This is kind of born out of the fact that like I feel really comfortable in the concrete sense of route setting, and I see a lot of new ideas happening that are already reflected in kind of thought that has happened in old forms. So trying to avoid repeating things that have already happened and trying to learn from those things in that sense. Architecture and psychology, and the psychology of design being one of those. So when I started reading about design, I started kind of seeing different psychological aspects pop up. This one popped out to me the most. The best thing about kind of trying to define a cultural and theoretical framework for something is that you can pick and choose what you find interesting, because nobody's done it yet. So the thing that popped out to me was Gestalt psychology of design. More so the like basic summation of it popped out to me, and its reflection on how I view route setting in a gym, and specifically commercial route setting. Gestalt popped up as essentially a antithesis to structuralism. Structuralism is kind of defined as every complex idea and every large idea in the world can be kind of summated by breaking it into the smallest functions and easiest functions to understand and building upon those. Gestalt kind of offers an opposite offering, which is the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. So one of the examples of Gestalt and the Gestalt quality, which is what is called, is if you take like a melody or a tune that's like immediately recognizable to you, it is larger than the parts of its sum. So if you take each individual note, there's something beyond the individual notes that binds it, because you can distort the tune, you can play it in a different key, and it still remains recognizable to you. So what that is called is the form quality in Gestalt psychology. What jumped out to me was oftentimes when you're root setting, you'll be able to recognize kind of that a boulder problem, once it's done, is defined by the fact that it's a boulder problem. It's not defined by each individual. It's not just a collection of movements and holds. It is in and of itself a whole that defines the parts. The parts work within it because of it. So we're all good there? We're understanding? Okay. This is like some imagery that early Distill and kind of Cubist and Dadaist movement artists really were into Gestalt psychology. That was the basic intro to Gestalt. This is what, how does it apply to design? A lot of Gestalt psychology kind of looks into, let's see. Anyway, so basically we take all of these larger design cues that will then allow you to view a boulder problem as a whole. I'm going to take my notes here. Okay. Now you might be sitting there thinking, Kieran, this is all well and good, but how does this relate into root setting as design thinking? One of the more enduring writings on Gestalt happens to be written by Max Wertheimer. It's the theory of form, or the dot essay. It concludes that humans have a tendency to perceive certain forms, and that's enhanced by certain visual cues. Those visual cues being constellating or similarity grouping. So something we've already talked about in design theory. That's elements that look alike, hold sets, similar shapes, etc. Proximity grouping, elements being close together, so clustering things to make them seem, a little bit more interesting. And having good structural continuity or hierarchy or any of those elements, allowing things to flow visually. So these are the laws of visual organization introduced in Gestalt psychology. Using these allow us to communicate intent and movement. There's a really good experiment done by a Gestalt theorist, Kopov, his name is, where you were given several tools and asked to construct a pendulum. Oftentimes, if you were given those tools in kind of a disconcerting format, so nothing was really relating to each other visually, people were unable to solve the problem. When you were given the tools that were supposed to be used next to each other, people were able to solve the problem quite easily. Oftentimes I find in visual organization, that's what we're trying to do. It's a more interesting way to kind of give visual cues as to what we're supposed to be doing in a boulder problem. If we're supposed to be moving through a negative space, keep that negative space moving. If we're supposed to be getting into a small bunched position, cluster holds, something like that. So that is essentially just like the most basic framework of what Gestalt psychology is, how I've been trying to apply it to design. This is kind of like a first foray into like exploring why that matters, what you can do with it, and how you can explain things as opposed to just like they look good. Having like a theoretical framework behind it. To bring it home, I'm not suggesting that this is like the be-all, end-all of psychological theories, or that anyone should really buy into what I'm talking about. It's just important to note that this is like an actual researched theoretical framework, and it really proves kind of there is reason behind all of these visual design elements and how they affect things. It's affected how I approach kind of root setting as a whole. I've been trying to think of gyms being the whole, sets being the whole, and boulder problems being a whole that define all of the things around them. So having that visual continuity not only through a holder problem, but through a set and then the gym itself as well. And it really kind of defines how it feels when you walk in, when you have good visual continuity. People feel like it makes sense to have like this folder problem next to this folder problem in the sense of it. Two other things that I've learned kind of from researching Gestalt are productive learning versus reproductive learning. One of them I really try to insert into a lot of the folder problems that I set. Productive learning at its basis is learning through kind of aha moments or snap and like brief insights. So a lot of that you'll find in outdoor climbing, where you'll be working something for hours, you've like reduced it to nothing, you still don't understand it, and then suddenly something makes sense to you, and then you realize that the body position should be this way instead of that. Reproductive learning is basically destroying something through trial and error. I think we all can agree that productive learning a lot of the times is a lot more fun because it applies that puzzle-solving aspect that climbing really gives you. So with that, oftentimes I'll try to nestle things or hints of things into folder problems to really reify productive learning versus reproductive learning. Oftentimes when we offer a solution in the form of a puzzle and it's less physical, people will have a better time. If the only way to get through a problem is the physicality, you're not offering a very empathetic problem. So yeah, applying visual empathy on top of athletic empathy. When you walk into a gym and you look at boulders and the hold sets are not matching, angles are kind of discordant, there are like blending colors into each other as opposed to colors that kind of pop out and allow you to like visually separate what's going on, it feels bad. This is just a further element of empathy that we can apply in our design process so that when you walk in, it's easy to identify what you're doing. Oftentimes, when people come to the Hive, it's their first time climbing, and they don't have a context as to what a climbing gym is, what climbing is. There's no cultural context. So when you're able to give them something that they can digest visually first, it's easier to go and actually climb. Okay, that's Gestalt. Any questions? Save it to the end. Okay. After that, I started looking at architecture as a precursor to routesetting. One of the things that I was kind of interested in is build space for human beings to move in. That is essentially what we do as routesetters. We build spaces for human beings to move around. That to me sounded a lot like architecture, something that we've been doing for a really long time. And when you're trying to kind of form a theoretical backbone around what you do, it's best to look at the thing that's the closest to it, or probably just the precursor to it, which is architecture. I'm going to start with two quotes. One of them is kind of a poem, the other one's not. So this one is by John Templar. He wrote 2 books entirely on staircases. This one is, architecture does not simply suggest movement. It frequently choreographs it, encouraging us to move in particular ways, adopting particular positions, sometimes quite insistently. How clear it is with stairways. Short steps with no landings tell your body to move straight up, no pausing, no turning. Grand stairways with narrow risers and spacious landings invite slow and gracious movement. We pause at the landings, gazing out to the distance. So this is a really real and easy to digest way of understanding the intent that we build our spaces with is reflected in the movement. Everyone comfortable with that idea? So when I construct a boulder problem, I don't want it to feel discordant with the way that it looks. I want the construction of it to reflect the movement intent. So the next one we're going to get into is Einfluon, or feeling into, is the theory of empathy. I'm going to read this quote, and then we can get into that. Architecture shelters and constrains the daily experience of our body in space. It is therefore not surprising that the adaptation of architectonic, that's to do with architecture, forms to the bodily senses evolved as a central architectonic theme over centuries. Several scholars propose that beyond the architectonic composition of modules, that is, walls, columns, vaults, and so on, molds, volumes, walls, etc., visual cues were introduced to augment the experience of continuity in physical space. For instance, the striving towards the effect of spatial unity can be seen in the application of color, texture, or sculpture to the architectonic interiors. With the aim to elicit a more elaborated degree of complexity in our experience of space, what we're trying to do as visitors. The question then is, how spatial sensations such as feelings of depth, continuity, presence, vertigo, containment, safety, or familiarity can be associated with meaning as well as emotion, has occupied vast amounts of literature. Embodiment theories in architecture have widely claimed that a figurative or abstract representation of the human body enhances sensations related to the architectonic environment. So, to break that down, how we reflect human bodies and movement in our boulder problems, how we reflect what we're expecting the person to do in the boulder problem should be reflected in how the boulder problem is presented visually. So Einfühlung or feeling into. Einfühlung is a feeling of empathy, directly translated, or feeling into. This is related to athletic and visual empathy, but it also kind of goes beyond that in the route setting process. When we're thinking about this, I'm not sure if the next slide was good. So when we're thinking about this, when we're in the setting process, we also want to think about how the person is viewing the boulder problem. So beyond like, how does this person feel in space when they're doing this? How does like a different body feel in space while they're doing this? We want to feel into how it feels to walk into the gym as a different person. Oftentimes when we're talking about feelings of empathy, we're talking about kind of visual or mind projections of ourselves in other bodies. We do it in forerunning, where we climb in essentially different bodies the entire time. When we forerun, if you're not a route setter, oftentimes we'll kind of limit our own bodies by reaching with our elbows or trying to do things kind of like based on augmented ways of climbing to see how another person would feel. An extension of that would be, how does this person feel walking into this space? It's important to kind of note, like, all of us come from different walks of life. All of us come from different, heights, cultures, etc. So when we have only our own visual cues to kind of go from, we're not thinking about how other people feel walking into the space. Feel normal? Great. So when we think about architectural theory and Einfühlung, I'm trying to suggest a deeper breadth of thought into the kind of empathize part of the design process, essentially. Instead of just thinking about how somebody feels in a particular movement, we're talking about how they feel in the space. What we can do to augment that with color, texture, the sculptural feeling of our boulders, really trying to drive home that, like, we are creating build spaces for people to move around in, and with that, there should be intent in everything we do. If somebody walks into the gym and at their level, there's only jug halls that go straight up, then they're going to understand that our intent for them is to kind of just fuck off. They're not going to have a great experience, and they're going to see people on 6Xs that have volumes, presses, and space to move through, and they're going to see that our intent isn't for them to enjoy the space, it's for others to enjoy the space as well. So yeah, that's kind of the basis of like a lot of the architectural theory. It's just a deeper feeling of empathy in the design process. Understanding that the way that we build spaces and construct spaces is reflected not only in how they feel, but how they look to other people, and the fact that other people, when they can't climb something, can still see it. They can still see and feel what we intended for other people. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
how's everyone feeling?
Like,
You guys want to take one more little stand up before we wrap things up, or good? Okay. So what? We just spent about an hour talking about some pretty esoteric theories and a few more practical things as well. But again, why is this being given at Staff Development Day? Why do we care about this? How does this affect the user experience? What's the point? Etc. We want you to come away with a few takeaways, some of the learning outcomes that we spoke about. And we think those takeaways broadly are similar, but are a bit different whether you are a staff member, a high climber, or a setter. You can use these things in different ways. So just as I think a climber, I think all of us are staff here, so you don't fit into this camp unless you come into the gym on your own time. Hopefully a climber is going to approach this space with a more experiential basis, and we want them through our hopefully heightened practice and route setting, we want them to come and play. We want them to experience at all levels like a variety of movement and walk away feeling like they have experienced something that was delivered with a lot of care and a lot of intention. We don't want them to feel like if they can't do a one-arm pull-up, they can't climb. We want them to feel like they have value to this community. We want them to feel like they are valuable in this space and that they can contribute value by coming and experiencing and partaking in the experiences that we are offering to them.
Ideally, it's a cultural shift away from like numbers-based climbing, the feeling kind of like domination, whether you are being dominated by boulder problems or you are dominating boulder problems, and trying to kind of derive value out of the experience as opposed to what numbers kind of define you.
Yeah. So, if you are not a route setter, but you work in the hive, there I think is a lot that can be taken from learning a bit more about the route setting process. Just as we were talking about how we sometimes get cornered by climbers after a set saying that, hey, like you broke the beta on your green boulder, I know that all of you get cornered as well sometimes saying like, I don't get the yellow one, it just doesn't make sense, like what do they want me to do? Or like, this is way too hard, it's stupid, whatever. People get frustrated by this stuff because people put a lot of care and attention and time into their own climbing, and it matters to them. And I think without a great understanding of what route setters do, and without a great understanding of what we want people to walk away from, it's really easy for those encounters for staff, rather than sort of being able to present the actual intention of a route setter or maybe prompt people to investigate the intention, it's really easy to disagree with them and be like, oh yeah, that is really clearly a poorly set boulder, or that clearly was set with no intention, or you're right, I have no idea what they wanted, like they must be crazy. And because we don't interact with the members on the same basis that you guys do, there's not really much that we can do about that other than try to communicate our intent more clearly through the boulder problems that we set. But that can be limited because it reduces the complexity. So we would like, for when those encounters happen, and just in general, when you're just talking to people, we would love these discussions about route setting to be a bit more thought-provoking and a bit more empathetic, both towards the climber and towards us as setters. We would love for those encounters to look more like the climber comes up to somebody and says, hey, I hate this stupid boulder problem, I don't know why it is the way it is, and I don't know how to solve it, and now I feel bad about myself, so I'm taking it out on you. We would rather that, we can approach those and you can approach those scenarios with well, hey, have you thought about what the intention was behind it? Have you thought about how you could maybe move differently? Have you watched other people on the boulder? Like, try to make those more productive and guide the person to something that we all are hoping that they're going to get to experience. It's like why a climbing gym exists, is to allow people experiences, allow them the affordance of solving puzzles and having that really excellent satisfaction, those aha moments that Kieran was talking about with the Gestalt theory. These are like little interactions that actually go a long way.
They also reinforce that we're part of a community, that route setters aren't kind of outside of that community, and it's more of a continuous conversation between us and desk staff and climbers and everyone kind of involved, as opposed to here's what we have, see you next week.
So, lastly, and then we'll open it up to questions. I think this is really applicable if you were a setter. Can I just get a show of hands, like who is setting right now at the gym? About half of you. So there's some like really practical takeaways and some more theoretical takeaways here. I guess I'll start with the more practical ones, and then if you're going to chat about the more theoretical ones. So broadly, just like having more intention than you said. I'll let you elaborate on that in a second. Move past it, but there's just some really like clear exercises that we can do that will, like, I'm not on the same team as all of you necessarily. Kieran is not on the same team as all of you all the time. But so this is something we can do together when we're together, and also just when you're offsetting with a different crew. So take every boulder that you set and try to incorporate some of these design principles. Actively give yourself a challenge, and sometimes that challenge can be given to you. You can get assigned to it by your head setter that day. But use repetition, use alignment, use contrast. Actually force yourself to think about boulder problems and how they exist as a part of a whole. That one's tricky. It takes a bit more time at the beginning of your set to look around the gym and say, okay, at the 2-hex level, how many step acrosses do I have? How many thuggy jug holders exist in the gym at this level? Try to insert the next problem that you're going to set so that it rounds out that holistic experience that people can have when they're climbing at that level. Because this gym works on circuit grading, we want there to be a wide range of styles represented across the grades. So it's just going to take a bit more of a pause. We're going to try to do this a bit more as a team as we move forward. Just like taking that extra step at the beginning of the day to think, okay, not just how does this exist in itself, how does it exist with the set, but really what is it contributing to the overall space. We'd also like you to use a bit more repetition, a bit more variance. We didn't actually get into variance, but basically thinking about using similar shapes and specific mold sets. Go follow your favorite setters on Instagram. They're all doing it. And just another great example looking at the box boulder. As you leave this talk, take a look around the gym. See which boulder problems stand out to you. 9 times out of 10, they're going to have similar shapes and similar mold sets from the same company. Because those shapes, despite being slightly different from each other, all have visual qualities that let you know as a viewer they are part of a set. When you use them on a boulder problem, that is translated into the climbing experience.
So yeah, if you're a setter, I'd like you to think about if you're working with me, kind of talk about this more in the set days, but try to take a step back before you put both on the wall, before you start, spraying volumes onto the wall, and try to take stock in who is climbing what your boulder is, how they're probably going to feel walking into the gym and looking at the set, and how that built space will affect their whole day, ideally. Look at how the colors that you use affect that space, how the textures that you use affect the textures around them. Oftentimes we can look to architectural theory, and there's endless reference points of strong vertical straight lines, having an uplifting feeling, and jagged corner lines having a discordant feeling. All of these things, if done well and intentionally, would be fine, just as long as they're not done without intention. So if your intent is to intimidate a 6-hex climber, that's fine, as long as the experience is enjoyable. As long as the intent is there to have a friendly sort of intimidation that feels good once it's done, then you can get into that. So drawing someone in with design-minded visual empathy. So really trying to understand who is climbing your boulders and giving them unique experiences. If the entire gym is covered in fiberglass, but only up to a certain level, try to give the lower levels of climbing and the lower grades an experience on those holes. It sucks to go into a gym and be those cheetah holes are really fun to climb on, but I'll never climb on them because they're only on upwards of 4-hex boulders. Next time the boulders are stripped, try to set a 2-hex. Try to set an easy boulder that allows them the experience of climbing on it. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, I think the last thing is just we've spent a lot of time thinking about this.
Yeah.
These things, these design principles, using them and actually practicing that in your setting is practice. This stuff doesn't happen overnight, and the only way to have it actually bleed in to the gym set and the user's experience is by doing it. And so the hope is that everyone who's a setter, or everyone who is involved with the boulders in whatever way, whether it's your climbing or your coaching, leave this talk with these principles in mind, and we believe that the gym as a whole will be uplifted, and the product that we offer, being boulders, will get better.
Questions?
Do you find that
color-based circuit system, or at least a numbers-based circuit system will definitely apply to that. I think in the future it would be nice to be able to maybe move towards a color-based circuit system. Oftentimes when I talk to my friends who are climbing at like maybe like up to V3, V4 level, gyms that apply a color-based circuit have a better culture of climbing because there's nobody that's like, oh, I'm a 6x climber, I'm better, or I'm a 4x climber, I'm better. They are climbing a pink tank. And it doesn't apply to their ego really because like, oh sure you climb a pink tank, but what does that mean?
That also may help motivate new listeners using that fiberglass outside of their like, you start setting there, say, oh, I'm a 4x climber, I want to put, my time that I use my 4x climb that day, and you use all the nice holes for that. You start off in a gym that has the color-based sets that, well, if you've got pink fiberglass, I think it's only if you want to be creative.
And just like almost like in defense of what the Hive is doing already, I think there's some really positive things that I've seen here compared to other gyms. The hex system is quite advantageous in this way. It has a lot of overlap between hexes. I think you can maybe like expand on the upper things because V8 isn't necessarily like the hardest of the hard building problems anymore, compared to when the hex system was created versus now. But by and large, like especially in the lower ends, like having things overlap from like V0 to V3 and then like V1 to V4, and I might be totally saying the hex system wrong, but you get the idea. That is going to create a lot of ability for a climber to show up and be like, oh, it might be a hard 2x or an easy, or a hard 1x or an easy 2x. Like, that's kind of the same. I can try both of those like in that realm. I think that's really well intentioned. We also do something where we cover the grade tags at the beginning of each set for about a week. And I think that is really, really positive because it just lets you climb based on what you think looks interesting. Yeah. And it makes you actually think it inspires a bit more thought when you are approaching a golden problem. You have to think not just like what's on the tag, but how does that look? How might I think about going to climb it? Because if you don't have that forethought, you might just get on something that like spits you off immediately. So I think there are a lot of really positive things. Not to say we're doing everything we can, but we're I think going in the right direction.
Why don't we operate with a color-based system?
Sorry?
Why don't we operate with a color-based system?
Just historically, we don't operate on a color-based system. I personally would like to move towards it, but that requires meetings. Meetings to take place.
Good.
Yeah. And money that we invested. Yeah.
I was curious on your thoughts about sort of dichotomy or using together coherence and both like guide to the solution versus complexity of the solving.
I don't think that they're.
Did everyone hear the question?
Not really.
So the question was, what is the difference, or like how does it relate to use coherence in a folder, guiding you towards a solution, or complexity, making it seem confusing?
Yeah, and I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. I think oftentimes, like if you have a gym culture that's used to reading folders that are presented in a certain way, presenting them in another way will definitely be confusing. But I do think that presenting things in a more complex design-oriented way will sometimes aid how naturally they climb. So that would be like, a boulder looking kind of like on at first, and when you hop on it, it kind of just guides you to the solution. And sometimes you climb on a boulder that looks like the solution is super easy, and because it wasn't set with much intent, it's really hard to get through. So I think it really depends on where the intent is for the set. I think that you can definitely guide people through complex situations if the set is done well.
And I guess that's the bias in commercial setting versus competition setting.
Yes and no. I personally like to include a fair amount of visual complexity in my boulders. It doesn't have to make it hard to read. There's a couple options that can be displayed, and I think that's where the complexity is that there's a couple options, but you might not know which one is the correct one or which one's the most natural one.
I think it's important to just draw a distinction as well that like something looking complex, you kind of said sorry, something looking complex doesn't mean that it will climb complexly, but like just because something has a lot of holes or a lot of like things going on when you're looking at it, it might feel like, hey, I can, but it might have a really simple solution. But oftentimes the most complex things to climb are something that is a singular volume on the wall. You're like, here you go, this looks super simple, figure it out. There's a term that Kieran hates, but I kind of like, called simplexity. But it basically is just saying that like oftentimes simple problems will have complex solutions and vice versa.
The structure of each gym is physically diverse.
Can you speak up a little?
Oh, sorry.
Speak up a little.
The structure of each gym is physically diverse. How would you describe the design intensity of each gym?
I think that, to be frank, the older gyms, specifically Vancouver, is very indicative of like an older climbing culture. It doesn't feel like it's designed to hold the capacity that it certainly does hold now. It does have a certain charm to people who are approaching it with that context. Having that cultural context, some people find that really charming and homey. But I find oftentimes when you're a newer climber, the context of having space to move around in and having space to like move away from other people to like try things on your own or gravitate towards large spaces safely feels a lot better. So Coco and Surrey gave really good examples of that. North Shore being an okay example of that, but kind of still closer to Vancouver.
You can really easily track the like evolution of climbing gyms and routesetting with the evolution of the heights. Like the first one's the oldest, kind of looks the worst. The newer ones are the newest, they kind of look the best. And there's like a lot more open space. It's like quite a clear linear pathway, I think.
So the question about gym design, I don't know if it makes sense, but would you rather have like a large palette of holds to use and simple walls, or like a more complex geometric shapes on your walls and less
Simple walls every time.
simple walls?
Yeah, it allows like a far easier use of space to like craft a different space. Like if you're given enough volumes and you have a flat wall, you can create any space you want on it. Like you can create a slab on 45 if you wanted to with enough volumes, and it's flat. Whereas in Vancouver, it's really hard to create creative spaces because everything changes so.
What about in that volume? Like just stuck with still find like being able to make like having a good complicated walls.
Yeah, I think that's something that we didn't touch on very much, but like thinking about the history of the way things have evolved with routesetting, volumes were like a massive breakthrough in like climbing gym technology, volumes and macro style features. Like if you looked at that, if you saw that old video of the comp climbing, it's just a tiny little hole, it's pull as far as you can. Volumes actually evolved in this kind of cool organic way. Jackie Gadoff, one of the most seminal route setters that you can think of, he was setting, I want to say, a European championship in like the 90s, and there was a carpenter in the area. They were basically stuck with like this really horrible selection of holds because holds were in short supply at the time and not everywhere had them. So there's a carpenter in the area that was like, oh, let me build you all of these funny like boxes and features to decorate the walls. They became volumes, and as soon as they put them on the walls, the route setters were like, oh my god, this changes everything. Like, they went on the walls and they were like, okay, this is now the future of route setting, and it has just led to this massive shift of things being modular. And like, as soon as volumes started to come onto the scene, all of a sudden, gyms like Vancouver, where there's lots of angle changes, just like the number of those that were being built was like crazy. We get gyms with like much more clean lines like this. One of my favorite gym designs is a place called Greenpoint 81 or GP 81 in New York, and it's just like there's I think 4 angles in the gym. There's super wide spaces, and it's just one long wall with like an angle change maybe every like 10 meters or something like that. And the effect is that like you can do a lot with volumes, or you can keep it simple. It just affords more flexibility.
How much do you plan ahead for making your set versus improvising in moments?
Do you mean like when we're stripping a section, like we're thinking about what we want, or like each folder that we're setting?
I guess.
Yeah, so I think we might all have different answers to that as setters. Some of the other setters might be able to weigh in as well. But oftentimes we'll have an idea of a feeling that we want, or a move that we want to try to encourage. Or sometimes our head setter will give like a movement intention or a style intention, or feeling attention. And so we'll kind of go based on that and then go into like the selection process where we're chatting with the other setters about, okay, what looks do you want, what color do you want, where are you trying to go, what's your idea, how can we make everything work. So I think it evolves pretty organically each day, and it's not the same really ever. I think for me, I love to throw a feature on the wall, see how it looks, and see how it looks with what other people are doing around it, and then kind of go based on that. Unless I have something really specific that I want for that day or something that I've been thinking about for a long time, then I'll just kind of maybe steamroll a little bit too much. But
Yeah, I also think it depends on how long you've been setting at whatever particular place you're setting at. I used to come in with like a lot of intention to like every space that I would set at, and now I'm kind of just trying to provide a unique experience for somebody in like a space that I've set for 4 years with the same holes. So it's almost like a process of elimination. Like I know I set this like 2 years ago. I would like to provide something that's not just a repetition. So sometimes it's not even like preparation; it's just like process of elimination.
it gets harder to avoid the echo chamber the longer you do it. But also at the same time, your movement library, the longer you do it, the mental movement library gets a lot bigger.
Yeah.
So the longer you're setting, the more you can just sort of like pick and draw from it. You learn how to set something up very quickly, which is also useful. It's more practice.
You guys have any journaling or tools so like before the type of plans you've done in the past to avoid repeating things, or is that just something?
For me, it's mental. I have a lot of stuff like on my phone as well. Generally, like if I'm trying to introduce a newer concept, I will have a memory of trying to introduce that concept, or like trying to introduce similar concepts.
Yeah, I think it's also, it's quite rare. I think it's very rare that someone is going to get into setting without a decent climbing background beforehand. And so all of that climbing that you're doing now is like a resource that you can use when you make the jump into being a grad center. So as you start to set, you're like, okay, I know what moves feel like. I know what things are going to be. And that library is something that just exists in your head. Like, I'm sure that you know, if you've been climbing for a little while, what a cross feels like. You grab a hold, you set your feet up, and then you move through your body. And so like as you start to put holds on the wall to try to encourage those movements, the feelings just get easier and easier. It gets a little bit more natural each time.
Do you like tally anything? Like you know for like say which triangles in a row, or is that just something you go based on?
Usually your head center. I have paid attention.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
Oh,
I
I-
also pay attention to what other people are doing as well.
Yeah, like I have like a video library of stuff that I set a lot of the time. And like it depends if I'm setting in like different gyms, like I'll be able to set the same thing across gyms, but try not to set the same thing over and over again. Same thing. Although I think these last couple of weeks I set a lot of press moves inadvertently.
I think the other thing that's important to note about setting is that it is like a service job. We are in service to the clientele of the hive. So removing yourself from the setting process in so much as I don't want to just set for like what I think is interesting. I would like to set with the intent of something that's interesting for other people. And I should be able to kind of differentiate whether, two hex climbers have been fed the same move for weeks on end, and whether or not they're going to, think that's working.
Yeah.
So, but this would just be something that you guys would just go based off of feeling. There's no like quota for figure fours in the year.
There's definitely no quota for figure fours. There is like we have like a grade quota for like what a gym should feel like, and we're going to start introducing like a smaller like kind of movement-based quota with like maybe a rig scale. But that's something that we're going to talk about tomorrow at our Routesetting class, so that we can kind of dial in what the feel of the gym is.
Yeah, and I think this is also what we were talking about earlier, which is like as we're starting a set, taking stock of what exists in the gym. Like, are there 5 dynos at V4? Yes. Okay, maybe we'll set something that has a bit more flow.
Yeah, just to touch on that. So when I first started, I wasn't from the lower mainland. I had climbing hives, and it comes down to a lot of communication. Start of the day, when I have crew lead or head setter, whoever's telling us to set, whatever we're set, I put up a problem because I had to climb up the hive, something, and it was almost unwrapped. Most people was there. You go to foreign, and you're just like, hey, yeah, someone just had that. I'm like, oh, okay. So we do come across the same ideas. It is rare, and usually has a lot of dominance being lined up that learn. But
think like head route setter's kind of a kid doctor.
Exactly.
Say like, no, we're going too hard on the gun.
Yeah. It might not be one person's memory of all the roller set, but it feels like a high line memory. It's just be like, pretty sure we had this move like 4 sets ago. Like, let's try to avoid that. And something different.
Yeah. I think we have time for one more, if anyone's got.
In my experience, like working at the gym, like the route setting process and department and everything is like by far the most enigmatic thing to other users, to customers of the gym, even to other climbers, even if they might have been climbing for a long time. And it's interesting to say that it's a service job essentially because that's the people who are experiencing the work, right? So my question is there something about the setting process or the design process or the realm of setting in general that you really wish our customers or our users understood better?
Yeah, but it's for them.
Yeah, it's not for us.
Yeah, that I'm not coming in and setting like. I find the biggest kind of misconception is oftentimes like an end user, like somebody climbing at the gym, will see how like a specific setter climbs or how they're built, and then they'll have like an immediate association with anything they view as being set in that style as being set by that person. One of the biggest examples is Vancouver. Anything that's spanning, anything that's powerful, anything that's grippy has been like for the last 3 years put on me. Oftentimes it's not because I've been trying to get away from
Because
that.
that's super morpho.
And Nika sets almost that exact style at Vancouver because she doesn't set it here. So I think one of the biggest things is like not trying to pigeonhole like what a route setter does based on like an adversarial view of them, and more so being like, oh, this is like a human being trying to provide me with something. And also understanding that we're human beings trying to provide me with like a unique experience and not like a robot that can be like, all right, here's your like 2-hex mantle problem of the week. Enjoy. It's perfect for every body. That was what I would like people to take from it.
Okay. One last thing to follow up on, just sort of drawing on experience from other gyms around the country and around the States. I think there's a lot that can be done to kind of like demystify the setters as a process. Something I've seen gyms do that's super simple. Setters just hang out after shifts or kind of come in at prime time, like one night a week, and just talk with people. Chat, climb, get feedback like actively as opposed to these like weird little paper feedback forms that sometimes people just draw like pictures of people points on. Like the feedback kit that we have now is a decent tool, but like getting setters into the gym to actually interact with the members, even sometimes just like I know the Hive has been not quite on the program for a while, but setting when the gym is open or like allowing that process to bleed into the first couple hours can provide tons of flexibility and engagement.
Just to piggyback on that, I guess, I try to take that opportunity whenever I get a question about resetting from a user because usually it's like, how do you guys get that stuff up on the walls? Like, do you put it up on the walls? Like, they think I'm there resetting because they don't even see you guys. So I would encourage everyone else here listening, like, if you have that moment in time where you might be able to talk to a customer or a user about the resetting process or what they do, just take that opportunity to kind of fill them in, like, demystify it a little bit more, and help bring some of that empathy about their own experience to what they're doing to try to.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.